The unforgiving sun beat down on the Arizona territory, a hammer on an anvil of stone. Below, a lone figure, a woman, gritted her teeth against a pain that was older than the mountains themselves. Her name was Alara Vance, and she was giving birth, utterly alone on a desolate rocky trail. Her fancy Boston dress was torn and stained with dust and sweat, a cruel mockery of the life she'd fled. Every shadow could hold a rattlesnake. Every gust of wind sounded like the hoofbeats of the man she was running from. She was out of water, out of time, and out of hope. With one final desperate cry echoing into the vast emptiness, she thought it was the end. But what she didn't know was that her cry had been heard. A silent rider, a shadow on the horizon, had just turned his horse in her direction. Her story wasn't ending. It was about to be rewritten in dust and blood, loyalty and love. The pain was a white-hot poker, twisting deep in Alara Vance's belly. It wasn't a new sensation, but its rhythm had changed, becoming a merciless tide pulling her under. She braced herself against a slab of sun-scorched granite, the rough surface biting into her palms. The Arizona sun, a malevolent eye in a bleached blue sky, offered no shade, no mercy. It was July of 1878, and the world had shrunk to this single agonizing point of existence. She'd been walking for 3 days since her horse had gone lame, forcing her to abandon the poor beast in the last of her meager supplies. 3 days of rationing the water in her canteen until the final lukewarm drop had passed her cracked lips that morning. Now there was nothing, only the metallic taste of fear and the rhythmic torment of childbirth. Foolish, Alara. Utterly foolish, she berated herself, her breath coming in ragged sobs. But what choice had there been? To stay in Prescott with Silas Blackwood was a death sentence of a different kind. Silas, her husband, the man who had courted her with honeyed words and promises of a grand Western life, only to reveal a soul as cold and hard as the gold he clawed from the earth. His love was a cage, his touch a brand of ownership. When she'd told him she was with child, the faint glimmer of joy in her heart was extinguished by the possessive glint in his eyes. "My son," he had declared, "not our child." Another asset for the Blackwood name. That was when she knew she had to run. She couldn't bring a child into that gilded prison. She had packed a small satchel, stolen away in the dead of night. Her only goal, the faint hope of reaching her sister, Clara, in Sacramento. It seemed a world away now, a childish fantasy. Another contraction seized her, sharper and more brutal than the last. She cried out, a raw, animal sound that was swallowed by the immense silence of the canyon. She slid down the rock face, her fine muslin dress, a relic of a life that no longer felt like hers, catching and tearing on the sharp edges. She was on her hands and knees in the red dirt, panting, her vision swimming. The baby was coming. Here. Now panic, cold and sharp, lanced through her. She was going to die. She and the tiny, innocent life inside her would perish on this forsaken trail, their bones picked clean by coyotes and bleached by the sun. Silas would probably find them eventually. He would stand over their remains, not with grief, but with the cold fury of a man whose property had been stolen. The thought was more terrifying than death itself. She tried to remember the things she'd heard the maids back home whisper about childbirth. Hot water, clean cloths, a midwife's steady hands. She had none of that. She had rocks, dust, and the encroaching shadows of dusk. She lay on her side, curling around the pain, her gaze fixed on the horizon, a blurry line of jagged purple mountains. A tear cut a clean path through the grime on her cheek. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the child she would never know. "I'm so sorry." It was then that she saw him. At first he was just a shimmer in the heat haze, a dark shape cresting the ridge. A rider, her heart hammered against her ribs, a wild bird trapped in a cage of bone. Silas. He'd found her. The thought sent a jolt of adrenaline through her, a strength born of pure terror. She tried to push herself up, to run, to hide. But her body was a leaden weight, anchored to the earth by its sacred, terrible work. But as the rider drew closer, she saw he was not Silas. He was not a white man. He was Apache. He sat atop a paint horse with a grace and stillness that seemed part of the landscape itself. He wore buckskin leggings and a simple cotton shirt. A single feather was tied in his long black hair, which flowed freely in the breeze. His face was stark and unreadable, carved from the same stone as the canyon walls around them. He carried a rifle in the crook of his arm, but his posture wasn't threatening. It was watchful. In his eyes, dark and deep, she saw not menace, but a profound, unnerving quiet. He halted his horse a respectful distance away, his gaze taking in the scene, the torn dress, her distended belly, the raw agony on her face. Fear warred with a desperate, burgeoning hope in Alara's chest. Stories of the Apache were whispered in hushed, fearful tones in Prescott. Savages, they called them. But the man before her was not the monster from those tales. He simply watched, his silence more powerful than any words. Another wave of pain crashed over her, and she screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. She squeezed her eyes shut, surrendering to the torment. When she opened them again, he was off his horse. He moved with a fluid, silent grace that was almost hypnotic. He approached not her, but his horse, and began to untie a waterskin from his saddle. He walked towards her slowly, deliberately, so as not to startle her. He knelt, not too close, and set the waterskin on the ground between them. He made no move to touch her, no sound. He just waited, his presence a calm anchor in her swirling sea of pain. Alara stared at him, then at the water. Her throat was a desert. With a trembling hand, she reached for the skin. Her fingers brushed against his as she took it, and his skin was warm, alive. She brought the vessel to her lips and drank, the cool water a blessing, a miracle. It was the kindest gesture she had been shown in years. When the next contraction hit, she didn't scream. She whimpered, biting down on her lip until she tasted blood. The Apache man, this silent stranger, watched her, his expression unchanged. But then he did something that stunned her. He began to speak, not in English, but in his own tongue. The words were soft, rhythmic, almost a chant. It wasn't directed at her, but at the sky, the earth, the setting sun. It sounded like a prayer. As the last light of day bled from the sky, casting the canyon in shades of orange and deep violet, Alara Vance realized her story was not over. It had just been handed to the most unlikely person in the world, a quiet Apache rider who, for reasons she could not fathom, had chosen to stay. The world dissolved into a fever dream of pain and prayer. The Apache's voice was a low, steady drone, a current beneath the sharp crests of Alara's agony. Night fell completely, blanketing the canyon in a cool, star-dusted darkness that was a relief after the day's oppressive heat. He built a small fire, the crackling flames pushing back the shadows and the creeping chill. He moved with an economy of motion, every action purposeful and serene. He had gathered dry brush and wood as if from thin air, his knowledge of the arid land absolute. Alara was beyond modesty, beyond fear of this man. He was no longer an Apache, no longer a stranger. He was the only other human being in her universe, a steady presence in the face of annihilation. Between the waves of labor, a strange lucidity would descend. She watched him. He took a knife from a sheath on his belt, the blade clean and sharp, and cut several broad, soft-looking leaves from a desert plant she didn't recognize. He laid them near the fire, and a clean, herbaceous scent filled the air. He never touched her without an unspoken invitation. When a particularly violent contraction arched her back, he laid a hand on her shoulder, firm and grounding. The touch was not intimate or invasive. It was supportive, as solid as the rock behind her. Through the haze of pain, she met his eyes. They were dark, ancient, and in their depths, she saw not pity, but a profound understanding. It was a look that said, "I have seen this before. I am not afraid." Hours bled into one another. He offered her more water, this time infused with some of the herbs he had gathered. It was bitter, but it eased the trembling in her limbs. He tore a strip from a clean cloth he produced from his saddlebag, wiping the sweat from her brow with a gentleness that brought fresh tears to her eyes. Silas had never touched her with such tenderness. His touch had always been about possession, about taking. This was different. This was giving. The final moments were a blur of instinct and firelight. The baby was coming, and there was no stopping it. Ilara screamed, pushing with a strength she didn't know she possessed, a primal force erupting from her core. The Apache man was there, his voice a low murmur, his hands suddenly sure and competent. He guided the tiny, slippery body into the world, his movements practiced and certain. A new sound split the night, thin and reedy, but utterly magnificent. A baby's cry. Ilara fell back against the bundled blanket he had placed behind her, utterly spent, her body a hollow, aching vessel. The world swam back into focus. The Apache man was holding her child, her baby. He had wrapped the newborn in the rest of the clean cloth from his bag, wiping it clean with the warmed leaves. He brought the bundle to her, his dark eyes finally showing a flicker of some deep, unreadable emotion. He laid the baby in her arms. She looked down at the tiny, wrinkled face, the tuft of dark hair, the small, perfect mouth that was still issuing soft cries. A son. She had a son. A wave of love so fierce and overwhelming washed over her, erasing the pain, the fear, the memory of Silas. This tiny being was hers. He was perfect. He was safe. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. The words felt inadequate, pebbles dropped into an ocean of gratitude. The man merely nodded, his gaze lingering on the child. He then rose and tended to the fire, giving her a moment of privacy with her son. She named him in the quiet of her heart. Caleb. It meant faithful, devotion. It felt right. For Caleb, she had found the courage to flee. For Caleb, she would find the strength to survive. For the next 2 days, they remained in the small, sheltered alcove. The Apache man, who she still didn't know the name of, was a silent, tireless guardian. He hunted, returning with a rabbit which he cooked over the fire, sharing the tender meat with her. He found a small, hidden spring, ensuring they had fresh water. He would check on her and the baby, his examinations brief and professional, his touch always respectful. He would then retreat to his own space by the fire, sharpening his knife or mending a piece of tack, wrapped in a blanket of impenetrable silence. His quiet was not empty. It was full of thought, of observation. She learned to read his moods by the set of his shoulders, the subtle shift in his eyes. She saw the way his gaze would sometimes drift to the horizon, a deep sadness settling over his features before he blinked it away. She sensed a great loss in him, a sorrow that mirrored the loneliness in her own heart. He was tending to her, yes, but it felt like something more. It felt like he was tending to a memory. On the third morning, he approached her as she was nursing Caleb. He spoke for the first time in English, his voice low and raspy from disuse, the words carefully chosen. "He is a strong boy." Ilara looked up, startled. "You speak English?" He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shrug. "Some. From the agency. At Fort Defiance." He gestured vaguely to the northeast. "My wife, she birthed our son, alone. The sickness came for them before I could return." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and heavy. Suddenly, his silence, his gentleness, his profound competence, it all made a terrible, heartbreaking sense. He wasn't just helping a stranger. He was reliving a tragedy, but this time, he was trying to write a different ending. "I am so sorry," Ilara said, her heart aching for him. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw past the stoic warrior to the grieving man beneath. "My name is Nokona." "I am Ilara," she replied softly, "and this is Caleb." "Ilara, Caleb," he repeated, testing the names. He looked at the baby, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "You cannot stay here. The man you run from, he will look for you." "I know," she said, the fear returning. "My husband." Silas Blackwood. Nokona's expression darkened at the name. It seemed he had heard it. Prescott was not so far away, and a man like Silas Blackwood cast a long shadow. "He is a man of much coin and no honor," Nokona stated simply. It was a damning indictment. "He will send men who track for money." "I have to get to California," Ilara said, her voice laced with desperation. "To my sister in Sacramento." Nokona was silent for a long moment, his gaze sweeping over the harsh landscape. He looked at her, weak and recovering, and at the fragile newborn in her arms. The journey to California was long and treacherous, impossible for them in their current state. "California is too far," he said finally, his voice firm. "The desert will claim you before you see the mountains, and his trackers will be on you before you reach the Colorado River." He stood up, his decision made. "We will go east, into the mountains. There are hidden places, places a white man cannot find. You will rest. The boy will grow stronger. Then we will see." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Her fate was now intertwined with his. To refuse was to choose death for herself and her son. To accept was to place her life, and Caleb's, entirely in the hands of this quiet, sorrowful Apache man. She looked from Nokona's determined face to the sleeping face of her son. The choice was not a choice at all. "Okay," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "We will go." Nokona nodded once. The unspoken bond forged in the crucible of childbirth was now sealed with a shared purpose: survival. He began to pack, preparing for a journey not to a destination on a map, but away from the darkness that was surely hunting them. 100 miles south, in the dusty, saloon-lined main street of Prescott, Silas Blackwood slammed a leather-gloved fist onto the polished surface of his oak desk. The decanter of whiskey rattled, spilling a few amber drops. He was a man accustomed to control, and for the past week, that control had been slipping through his fingers like fine sand. 3 days, he snarled, his voice a low growl. "You've been tracking her for 3 days, and all you can tell me is that her horse went lame near the Verde River?" Across the desk stood 2 men. The first, Jebediah "Jeb" Stone, was as weathered and unyielding as the landscape itself. His eyes were the color of faded denim, and they missed nothing. He was a bounty man, a tracker of legendary repute, and he did not flinch at Blackwood's fury. His younger partner, a nervous man named Billy Prentice, shuffled his feet and stared at the floor. "It's rough country, Mr. Blackwood," Jeb said, his voice a dry rasp. "She's on foot now. Could have gone any direction, could have fallen in a ravine, bit by a snake." "She is not dead," Silas interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerously soft tone. "Elara is resilient, and she has something of mine. You find her. You find my son." He spat the words out as if they were poison. "The price I offered was for her swift return. The longer this takes, the less generous I will be feeling." Jeb's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't like Blackwood. The man reeked of a cruelty that went beyond business. But the money was good. Too good to pass up. "We found her trail heading east, towards the Tonto Basin. But it's faint. A storm washed out most of it." "Then find it again," Silas ordered, dismissing them with a wave of his hand. "I want my wife and my heir back. I don't care what condition she's in, as long as she's breathing. The boy, however, must be unharmed. Do you understand me, Stone?" "Perfectly," Jeb said, turning to leave. Billy nearly tripped over his own feet in his haste to follow. Once they were gone, Silas walked to the window, staring out at the town he practically owned. Elara had defied him. His quiet, beautiful Boston bride had revealed a will of iron he never suspected. He had thought her a fragile doll to be dressed up and displayed. Instead, she had stolen his legacy and vanished into the wilderness. He wouldn't just punish her. He would break her, piece by piece, until the only thing left was obedience. Meanwhile, in a hidden canyon deep within the Mazatzal Mountains, Elara was discovering a strength she never knew she possessed. The journey from the trail had been arduous. Nokona had fashioned a sling for Caleb, strapping the baby securely to Elara's chest. For himself, he carried their few supplies, moving with the tireless gait of a man born to the mountains. Their new home was a shallow cave set high on a cliff face, accessible only by a narrow winding path. It was well hidden and offered a commanding view of the canyon below. A small, clear spring trickled from the rock at the back of the cave, providing them with fresh water. It was a sanctuary. Life fell into a simple, quiet rhythm. Days were spent caring for Caleb, who was growing stronger, his cries replaced by soft gurgles and coos. Elara's body slowly healed, her strength returning with the nutritious food Nokona provided. Stewed rabbit, roasted quail, and strange but fortifying roots and plants. Nokona was a patient teacher. He taught her which berries were safe to eat, how to read the clouds for signs of rain, how to make a sturdy cord from yucca fibers. He spoke little, but when he did, it was to impart some essential piece of knowledge. Their conversations were sparse, built around the necessities of survival, but a deep, abiding trust grew in the silence between them. She watched him when he thought she wasn't looking. She saw the way he would gently touch the new leaves of a sapling, the reverence with which he treated the animals he hunted, using every part and wasting nothing. He was a part of this land, and she was a trespasser he had taken under his protection. One evening, as Caleb slept soundly in a makeshift cradle of woven willow branches, Alara found the courage to ask, "Nokona, why are you helping me? It's a great risk for you." Nokona stared into the fire, the flames dancing in his dark eyes. He was silent for a long time. "My people are scattered," he said, his English still careful and deliberate. "The soldiers push us onto reservations, land that is sick. There is no honor there. I left. I walked my own path." He poked the fire with a stick, sending a shower of sparks into the darkness. "When I found you, I heard my son's spirit crying in the wind. To leave you would be to leave them to die a second time. My path led me to you. It is the way." Alara felt a profound sense of humility. Her personal tragedy, which had felt so all-consuming, was a single thread in a much larger tapestry of sorrow and displacement. He had lost everything, his family, his people, his way of life. Yet he had not lost his humanity. A week later, their fragile peace was shattered. Nokona had been gone since dawn, checking his snares further down the canyon. Alara was sitting at the mouth of the cave, rocking Caleb, humming a soft lullaby. A flicker of movement below caught her eye. Two riders moving slowly, carefully, their heads down as if studying the ground. Her blood ran cold. Even from this distance, she recognized the wiry frame of the younger man, Billy, and the stoic, confident posture of the older one, Jebediah Stone. She had seen them in Prescott, loitering near her husband's office. They were his men. Her heart leaped into her throat. She snatched Caleb from his cradle and scrambled to the back of the cave, pressing herself into the darkest corner, her hand clamped over the baby's mouth to stifle any sound. She prayed to a God she hadn't spoken to in years. "Don't let them find us. Please don't let them find us." Down below, Jeb Stone reined in his horse. "See that, Billy? The grass is bent there, and over there. Someone came through here not long ago." Billy squinted, wiping sweat from his brow. "But Jeb, this whole country is full of Apache ghosts. Could be anything." "No," Jeb said, his gaze sweeping the canyon walls. "This is different. Blackwood said she was on foot. These are moccasin tracks, but they're alongside a smaller, shod boot print. Faint, but it's there." His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the cliffs. "She's not alone. She's with someone who knows this land." He dismounted, walking a few paces, his eyes missing nothing. He knelt, picking up a tiny scrap of white cloth caught on a thorny bush. It was muslin from the dress Alara had been wearing. "Well now," Jeb murmured, a grim smile touching his lips. "Looks like we're in the right place." From her hiding spot, Alara watched in pure terror as Jeb Stone looked directly up toward the cliff face where their cave was hidden. He couldn't see it, not from that angle. But he was looking. He knew. She held her breath, the silence in the cave roaring in her ears. Caleb stirred against her, and she tightened her hand, whispering desperate pleas for him to stay quiet. The moments stretched into an eternity. Finally, Jeb turned away. "It's getting dark," he said to Billy. "We'll make camp down here. Get a fresh start at sunrise. If they're up there, they ain't going nowhere." Alara's legs gave out, and she slid to the cave floor, trembling uncontrollably. They were trapped. When Nokona returned, he would walk right into their camp. She had brought Silas's evil into his world, and now it was going to destroy him too. She clutched Caleb to her chest and wept silent, bitter tears in the encroaching darkness. The moon was a sliver of bone in the black sky when Nokona returned. He didn't come up the main path. He emerged from a fissure in the rock face Alara had never even noticed, moving as silently as the shadows themselves. He found her huddled in the back of the cave, her face pale and streaked with tears. "They are here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Two men, from my husband. They are camped at the bottom of the canyon." Nokona's body went rigid. He crept to the edge of the cave and peered down. He was still for a long time, observing the small flicker of the campfire far below. He could see the two figures, their shapes dark against the flames. Trackers. Good ones to have found this place. He came back to her, his face a mask of cold fury. It wasn't directed at her, but at the intrusion, the violation of this sacred place. "We leave. Now." "But how?" Alara despaired. "The only way down." "There is another way," he said, his voice low and urgent. "A way for the people, not for horses, not for white men." He gathered their few belongings with swift, efficient movements. He took Caleb from her, securing the baby to his own chest this time. "You will follow me. Do not look down. Do not make a sound." He led her to the back of the cave, past the spring, to what she had thought was a solid wall of rock. He pressed on a specific spot and a section of stone grated, moving inward to reveal a dark, narrow opening. It was a passage, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. The air that wafted out was cool and ancient. Fear warred with necessity. "Where does it go?" she breathed. "Through the mountain," Nokona said simply. "To the next valley. Now come." The journey through the tunnel was a claustrophobic nightmare. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the occasional spark Nokona made with a flint and steel to light their way for a few feet. The path was uneven, sometimes dropping sharply, other times forcing them to crawl. Alara followed the sound of his soft footsteps and the faint, reassuring scent of wood smoke that clung to him. She focused on the precious bundle he carried, the son whose life depended on this terrifying subterranean flight. They emerged hours later on the other side of the mountain, into the pre-dawn grayness of a new day. They were in a different canyon forested with pine and aspen. The air was cooler here, cleaner. They had escaped. For the next few weeks, they were true ghosts, moving constantly, never staying in one place for more than a day or two. Nokona pushed them hard, his senses on high alert. He knew the trackers would find the empty cave and would not give up easily. He taught Alara to cover their tracks, to move through the wilderness without leaving a sign of their passing. She learned quickly, her soft hands growing calloused, her city-bred fragility burning away to reveal a core of tempered steel. But their supplies were dwindling. They needed salt, flour, and Nokona knew Alara and the baby needed more than he could hunt and gather. His medicinal herbs were running low. "There is a place," he said one evening, as they shared a meager meal of roasted roots. "A trading post, near Fort Defiance. It is a long walk, 2 weeks maybe, but we must go." Fort Defiance. The name sent a chill down Alara's spine. It was an army fort, a hub of the very world she was fleeing. To go there was a risk, but to stay in the wilderness with a growing baby and no supplies was a certainty of failure. "Will it be safe?" she asked. "No place is safe," Nokona answered honestly. "But the man who runs the post, Samuel Croft, he is fair. He trades with my people. He asks few questions, if the coin is good." Alara still had a few gold coins sewn into the hem of her ruined dress, a last resort from her escape. It was their only hope. The journey north was the hardest yet. They crossed windswept mesas and navigated treacherous ravines. Alara's boots wore through, and Nokona fashioned her a pair of sturdy moccasins from deerskin. They grew closer during those weeks, their shared hardship forging a bond deeper than words. He would sometimes point out constellations to her at night, telling her their Apache names. She would tell him stories of Boston, of the ocean, a concept so foreign to him he could barely comprehend it. They were from different worlds, yet under the vast, silent sky, they were simply two people trying to protect a child. They finally arrived at the outskirts of Croft's trading post looking like specters. It was less a town and more a collection of rough-hewn buildings huddled in the shadow of the fort. The sight of soldiers in blue uniforms made Alara's stomach clench. Every white man's face seemed to morph into Silas's. Nokona had her wait with Caleb in a stand of cottonwood trees while he went in first. She watched him walk into the trading post, his posture proud and straight, and felt a surge of anxiety. He was a lone Apache in a white man's world, and she had put him there. Minutes later, he emerged and beckoned her forward. The inside of the post was dim and smelled of leather, tobacco, and dust. A large, barrel-chested man with a bushy gray beard stood behind the counter. This was Samuel Croft. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Alara and the baby, but as Nokona had promised, he asked no questions. "Ma'am," he grunted, a gesture of respect. Alara nodded, pulling her worn shawl tighter around herself and Caleb. She placed her gold coins on the counter. "We need flour, salt, bacon, some cloth if you have it, and medicine. For a baby's fever, just in case." Croft's gaze was shrewd but not unkind. He gathered the items, his movements methodical. As he was wrapping a bolt of soft flannel, he leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You'd best be careful, the two of you." Alara froze. "What do you mean?" "Two men passed through here a week ago, asking questions," Croft said, not looking at her. "Professional types, a hard-looking fella named Jeb and a younger, squirrely one. Said they were tracking a runaway wife for a mining baron in Prescott. A Mr. Silas Blackwood." The name hung in the air, cold and deadly. Alara felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. They were still being hunted. "They said the woman was with an Apache," Croft continued, his eyes flicking to Nokona, who stood impassively by the door. "There's a bounty, a big one, big enough to make a man forget his conscience." He pushed the bundle of supplies towards her. They headed north, towards Utah territory, thinking you'd try for the railroad. "But they'll circle back. Men like that always do." He looked at Alara, a flicker of something like pity in his eyes. "Your man, Blackwood. He's not just looking for you. He's put the word out that the Apache stole his wife and child. The army patrol from the fort has his description." He jerked his head towards Nokona. "To them, he's not a man. He's a kidnapper. They'll shoot him on sight." The horror of it crashed down on Alara. She had not only endangered Nokona, she had made him a target, painted him as a criminal. Her escape had become his death sentence. They took their supplies and left without another word. The sanctuary of the mountains was no longer safe. The civilized world wanted to hang her savior. As they melted back into the wilderness, Alara knew a terrible choice was looming. She could continue to endanger Nokona, or she could find a way to disappear, to cut him loose from the fate she had tied him to. But the thought of facing the world without him, without his quiet strength and unwavering loyalty, was an agony all its own. The trackers were behind them. The army was ahead of them, and their time was running out. The news from Samuel Croft settled like a shroud over them. The wilderness, once a sanctuary, now felt like a closing trap. Every rustle of leaves, every distant bird call, sent a jolt of fear through Alara. They were being hunted not just by bounty men, but by the United States Army. Nokona's life was now forfeit because of her. The weight of her guilt was crushing. One night as they sat by a smokeless fire in a high rocky crevice, she finally spoke the words that had been poisoning her thoughts. "You should leave me, Nokona." He didn't look at her, continuing to stitch a patch onto one of Caleb's cloth wraps with a bone needle. "The boy needs a father." The simple, unadorned statement struck her with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't staying out of obligation or pity. In his mind, in his heart, he had already adopted this child, this family forged in desperation. "They will kill you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Silas has painted you as a monster. They will shoot you and ask questions later." "Let them try," he said, his voice flat and hard as stone. He finally looked at her, his dark eyes burning with an intensity she had never seen before. "I lost one family. I will not lose another." His declaration sealed their fate. They were in this together until the end. But Nokona knew they could not outrun the hunt forever. They had to stop running and make a stand. "The tracker," he said, his mind already working. "The hard one, Jeb. He thinks like a wolf. He will not follow our trail now. He knows we are aware of him. He will try to think where we will go." Nokona's gaze grew distant. "He will think we will try to hide somewhere we can survive the winter. Somewhere with water and game." He pointed to a jagged peak far to the south. "There is a place, a valley of hot springs. My people used it as a winter camp. It is difficult to find. We will go there. We will let them come to us." It was a terrifying gamble. Instead of running, they would walk into a trap of their own making, hoping to turn it on their pursuers. They traveled for another week, making their way to the hidden valley. It was an oasis, a patch of impossible green in the midst of the red rock desert. Warm water bubbled from the earth, feeding a lush meadow where deer grazed peacefully. It felt like the beginning of the world, a place of peace that was about to be violated by the hatred of one man. They made their camp, but it was a camp designed for a battle. Nokona chose a spot backed by an impassable cliff, with a clear line of sight to the narrow canyon mouth that was the valley's only entrance. He spent days preparing. He set snares, not for animals, but for men. He scouted every rock and tree, planning lines of attack and retreat. He showed Alara how to load and fire the rifle, her hands shaking at first, then growing steady. "You will stay hidden with Caleb," he instructed, pointing to a small defensible nook in the rocks above their camp. "You will not come out unless I fall, then you will run, and you will not stop running." The wait was the worst part. Days passed in tense silence. The peace of the valley felt like a mockery. Alara held Caleb close, her heart a constant, throbbing drum of fear. She watched Nokona, saw the lethal focus in his eyes, and understood that this quiet, gentle man was also a warrior, prepared to kill to protect them. Then one afternoon, they came. Nokona spotted them first, two figures on horseback appearing at the canyon mouth. It was Jeb and Billy, but they were not alone. Behind them rode a third man, sitting tall and arrogant in a fine leather saddle, Silas Blackwood. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. He had come himself. The thought of him being so close, of his eyes falling on her and Caleb, filled her with a pure, primal terror. "It is him," Nokona stated, his voice devoid of emotion. He checked his rifle. "Stay hidden. Do not make a sound." Ilara scrambled into the rocky nook with Caleb, her body trembling. She peered through a small crack, her world shrinking to the unfolding drama below. Silas and his men rode slowly into the valley, their eyes scanning the area. Jeb was clearly uneasy, his hand never far from his pistol. "This is it. This has to be the place," Billy said nervously. "It feels quiet, too quiet." "She's here, I can feel it," Silas said, his eyes gleaming with a feverish light. He dismounted, his expensive boots sinking into the soft grass. "Alara!" he bellowed, his voice echoing off the cliffs. "Alara, my love, come out! This foolishness has gone on long enough. Come home, and I will be merciful." Silence was his only answer. A cruel smile twisted Silas's lips. "Very well. Have it your way." He turned to Jeb. "Find them. I want my son, and I want to have a long talk with my wife." Jeb nodded grimly and began to move forward, his eyes missing nothing. But Nokona had prepared for him. Jeb took 2 steps and his foot snagged a vine hidden in the grass. A heavy log suspended in the trees above swung down with terrifying speed. Jeb dove to the side, rolling hard, the log smashing into the ground where he had been standing. From the rocks a shot rang out. Billy Prentice cried out and crumpled to the ground, clutching a bloody shoulder, his pistol falling from his grasp. Nokona had not aimed to kill, but to disable. "Ambush!" Jeb yelled, drawing his own gun and firing into the rocks where the shot had come from. Silas, his face a mask of rage, drew a fancy silver-inlaid revolver and fired wildly. "Show yourself, you filthy savage! Show yourself and die!" Nokona was already gone, melting into the landscape, a ghost moving from rock to rock. Another shot, and Silas's horse screamed and bolted, leaving him on foot. From her hiding place, Alara watched, her heart pounding. It was a deadly dance, Nokona's skill against their numbers and firepower. But Silas was growing more enraged, more reckless. "Ilara, I know you can hear me," he screamed, his voice cracking with fury. "If you do not come out right now, when I find you, I will make you watch as I skin this savage alive. And then I will take my son, and you will never see him again." The threat, so vile and specific, broke through Alara's fear. A cold, hard anger rose in its place. This man would not have her son. He would not destroy the man who had saved them. She saw Silas reloading, his back turned. Jeb was focused on the cliffs, trying to pinpoint Nokona's position. Billy was moaning on the ground. This was her chance. Making a decision that would define the rest of her life, she whispered, "I am so sorry, Caleb," kissed her sleeping baby's head, and laid him gently in the safest part of the nook. Then she picked up the rifle Nokona had left for her. She stepped out from behind the rock. "Silas," she called out, her voice clear and steady. He spun around, his face a mixture of shock and triumphant fury. "Ilara, there you are." A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "You have caused me a great deal of trouble. Drop the gun. Now." "No," she said, the rifle feeling surprisingly solid in her hands. "It's over. Leave us alone." "Leave you?" He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You are mine. That child is mine. You belong to me." He took a step towards her. At that moment, Nokona appeared on a ledge above and to the side of Silas, his own rifle leveled. Silas was caught between them. Jeb Stone saw it. He looked from Silas's crazed expression to Ilara's defiant stance, to the Apache warrior ready to kill for them. He looked at his injured partner. This wasn't about a bounty anymore. This was a man's obsessive madness. With a quiet curse, Jeb holstered his pistol and began dragging the whimpering Billy back toward the canyon mouth. He was a professional, and this job had just become unprofitable and deeply personal. He was done. Silas barely noticed them leave. His entire world was focused on Ilara. "You would choose this animal over me?" He spat, his face contorted with hate. "He is more of a man than you will ever be," Ilara said, her voice ringing with conviction. With a primal roar of fury, Silas raised his pistol, not at Ilara, but towards the rocks where he knew Nokona was. But as he turned, he exposed himself. Nokona fired. The shot was perfect. It struck the revolver in Silas's hand, sending it flying into the grass, shattering the bones in his hand. Silas screamed, a sound of agony and shock, clutching his ruined hand. He stared at it in disbelief, then looked up at them, his power, his control, utterly broken. He was weaponless, abandoned by his men, facing the woman he thought he owned and the warrior he could not defeat. Nokona slid down the rocks, landing silently on the grass, his rifle still trained on Silas. Ilara kept her own weapon raised. They did not kill him. Death would have been an escape. They stood there watching him as he backed away, cradling his bloody hand, his eyes filled with a mixture of terror and impotent rage. He stumbled, fell, and scrambled back to his feet, before turning and running, a broken, pathetic figure, disappearing back down the canyon he had ridden into with such arrogance. Silence descended on the valley once more. It was over. Ilara's hands began to shake, and she finally lowered the heavy rifle. Nokona came to her side. He didn't speak, but he gently took the gun from her and placed a steadying hand on her arm. She looked up into his eyes and saw not a warrior, but the quiet, gentle man who had saved her on a rocky trail. She had not only saved her son, she had helped save her savior. And in that shared victory, they were no longer a woman on the run and her guardian. They were a family. The aftermath of the confrontation left the valley ringing with a profound silence. The echoes of gunfire and Silas's enraged screams faded, replaced by the gentle murmur of the hot springs and the sigh of the wind through the pines. Jebediah Stone and his partner were long gone, a testament to a code that, however brutal, drew a line at a man's unhinged obsession. Silas Blackwood was a ghost, fled back to a world of wealth and power where he would nurse a shattered hand and a broken ego, but he would not return. The fear he had cast over their lives had been broken. Ilara rushed back to the rocky nook, her heart seizing until she saw Caleb, safe and still sleeping, his tiny chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. She gathered him into her arms, burying her face in his warm blanket, and a wave of relief so powerful it left her weak washed over her. When she emerged, Nokona was standing where Silas had last been, staring out towards the canyon mouth. He had retrieved Silas's silver-inlaid revolver from the grass, not as a trophy, but as a final, tangible piece of a past they were now leaving behind. He turned as she approached, his eyes meeting hers. In their depths, she saw the end of a long and painful road. The sorrow he carried for his lost wife and son was still there, a part of him as indelible as a scar. but it was no longer the all-consuming darkness it had once been. It was now tempered by a new light, a new purpose. "It is done," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "It's done," she agreed, shifting Caleb in her arms. "Thank you, Nokona, for everything." "You were brave, Ilara," he said, his gaze dropping to the rifle she had held so steadily. "You found the heart of a warrior." A faint blush rose on her cheeks. "I found the heart of a mother." They stood there for a long moment, the spoken truce of their journey settling around them. The path to her sister in Sacramento was now clear. The threat was gone. She was, for the first time, truly free to go. But the thought of leaving, of taking Caleb and walking out of Nokona's life, felt like a betrayal. It felt wrong. The life she had been running towards seemed pale and distant compared to the life she had found. "California," she began, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. I suppose we should go." Nokona's expression remained unreadable, but a stillness came over him, a bracing for a blow. He gave a single, slow nod. "The way is safer now. I will take you to the edge of the desert, to the trails the wagon trains use." He would lead her to the threshold of her old world and then turn back to his, a lone wanderer once more. The thought created an ache in her chest so sharp it was a physical pain. This man who had delivered her child, who had protected them, taught them, and fought for them, how could she leave him? She looked down at Caleb's sleeping face, then back up at Nokona. She thought of the cold, judgmental society she had fled, a world that would see her as a ruined woman, a widow with a child born in scandal. Then she looked around the valley, at the clear water, the green grass, the towering, protective cliffs. It wasn't a place on a map, but it was a home. "I don't want to go to California," she said, the words tumbling out, filled with a sudden, fierce certainty. "There is nothing for me there but my sister's pity. There is nothing for Caleb but questions I can never answer." She took a deep breath, her gaze locking with his. "My home is here, with you, if you will have us." For the first time since she had met him, Ilara saw Nokona truly stunned. His stoic mask crumbled, revealing a vulnerability and a hope so profound it made her heart ache. He looked from her to the child in her arms, and a slow, genuine smile spread across his face, transforming his features, erasing years of sorrow. He stepped forward and gently, hesitantly, touched Caleb's cheek with his finger. "Our home," he corrected her, his voice thick with emotion. He did not need to say more. In those two words, a new life was consecrated. They did not stay in the valley of the hot springs. It held the ghosts of their battle, the taint of Silas's hatred. It had served its purpose. Instead, they traveled for another month, moving deeper into the high country, to a place Nokona knew from his youth. It was a place cartographers had not yet found, a pristine mountain meadow bisected by a rushing creek, protected on all sides by towering granite peaks. A place to build a life, not just to hide one. Together they built a small, sturdy cabin from pine logs, chinking the gaps with mud and moss. Ilara, using the skills Nokona had taught her, cultivated a small garden, planting seeds they had traded for at a distant, friendly Navajo encampment. Nokona hunted and fished, and little Caleb grew from a fragile infant into a sturdy toddler, with his mother's bright eyes and his protector's serene spirit. Their lives were simple, hard, and beautiful. The past was a distant country. The name Silas Blackwood was never spoken. Ilara's life in Boston became a half-remembered dream. Here in this hidden paradise, she was not Mrs. Blackwood, the mining baron's wife. She was Ilara. He was Nokona. And the boy who played by the creek, chasing butterflies, was Caleb, their son. The quiet Apache who had ridden by and seen a woman in need had not just stayed for a moment or a season. He had stayed forever, building a family not of blood, but of fierce loyalty and a love as strong and enduring as the mountains themselves. They were a testament to the fact that sometimes the family you are running to is not a destination on a map, but the person who finds you when you are lost along the way. The story of Ilara, Caleb, and Nokona is a powerful reminder that family is not always the one we are born into, but the one we forge in the fires of hardship. It's a testament to the fact that courage can be found in the most desperate of moments, and that love can blossom in the harshest of landscapes. Theirs is a story of survival, yes, but more than that, it's a story of redemption, not just for a woman fleeing a dark past, but for a man who found a reason to live again in the cries of a newborn child. These are the untold tales of the American West, the stories of quiet heroes and unbreakable bonds that history books often forget. If their incredible journey touched your heart, please show your support by hitting that like button and sharing this video with someone who appreciates a story of true resilience. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. We have so many more stories like this one to share, bringing the forgotten sagas of the frontier back to life. Thank you for listening.